I'm Emily Hawthorne, a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, and this podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, our premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analyses. Individual, team, and enterprise memberships are available at worldview.stratfor.com/subscribe.
Welcome to the Stratfor podcast from stratfor.com. I'm your host, Ben Sheen. On this episode of the podcast, what happens when espionage is just too effective, and also strategies for managing risk.
Hi, I'm Fred Burton.
And I'm Scott Stewart.
Scott, corporate espionage is a global threat, and security programs need to be too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to stress that. As you and I have talked about before, in many security programs, we really kind of have a double standard. So if you have, say, an executive who's traveling to a country that's seen as safer, say a place
like Canada, for example?
Yeah, or the UK, or even places in the US, the standards for how that employee can travel, what he can take with him as far as proprietary information, is far different than say an employee going to a hostile or quote unquote hostile country like China or Russia.
I know. We get all kinds of questions, as you know, especially in the threat lens format regarding executives traveling to China or Russia. But it seems like most people forget that the threat also exists in other parts of the world.
Yeah, and that's what we're really trying to get at with with the piece that I published a couple weeks ago. It's really focusing on this idea that the threat is global, and basically, especially these sophisticated actors, they will go where the information is. It's like that old alleged Willie Sutton quote about I robbed banks because that's where the money's at. Well, that's the same thing when it comes to industrial espionage. The people that are looking for your information are going to go to where they need to get that information.
It's almost, Scott, I know, just as we digress back to our U.S. government careers, there's almost a psychological aspect to this, that people tend to lower their guard when they're traveling to places like Western Europe, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because they just don't see it as being as dangerous. And as you and I know, during the Cold War, there were a lot of KGB officers and CIA officers who really made a lot of hay being able to recruit sources in these third world countries, India, Africa, other places, more so than, say, in Washington or Moscow.
Of course, you look at some of these areas, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, where you don't have robust local intelligence services. Therefore, when you have nation-state actors like Russia, they're able to pretty much operate wherever they would like.
Yeah, they're really unhindered. But I also think it's a mistake to focus just on those places too. When we talk about global, it means global. And even in the U.S. here, I keep thinking back to the number of cases that we've had of insider sources at places, like Apple and their autonomous vehicle operations, or some of the operations that we've seen of the Chinese reaching out by LinkedIn to recruit, say, GE engineers in Cincinnati. It really does illustrate the fact that it's a global threat.
Are there any areas, do you think, just thinking through this, that you would feel that are more vulnerable, or is this the kind of phenomena that, as you think through this, we should be looking at it from a comprehensive perspective with just like a global overarching umbrella?
No, it really has to be comprehensive. And it really, when we talk about, kind of the protecting against this threat, it really has to start with identifying what your real secret sauce is. You can't protect everything. And when you try to protect everything, you're protecting nothing. So what you really need to do is identify that which is truly critical, and then, take actions to really limit the access that people can have to that in terms of the number of people who can access it, but also how they can access it, or how they can access that information.
And I also think, Scott, it starts in many ways with the C-suite too. I mean, how many CEOs have we engaged with or been aware of over the years that, I'm only going to New York. What's the real vulnerability there?
Yeah, and I recall probably over a decade, maybe 15 years ago, a CEO having his laptop stolen after he gave a presentation at a dinner in San Francisco. Definitely is the kind of thing that happens, even here in the United States.
As you look at this from a awareness perspective, do you think it begins there, or how should multinational corporations remind the employees without beating them over the heads or inundating them with the risk? It's the same phenomena that IT has at times with, where is that careful balance of good business practices or notifications, and when does the workforce say, I can't take any more of these alerts from security or IT?
Yeah, I think that there is a danger of kind of overhyping things, but at the same time, the threats are very real, and we see examples of companies losing potentially billions of dollars due to their intellectual property walking out the door. And so, I mean, you can't hype it too much. You can't make people totally paranoid. But at the same time, you have to have programs in place that do a good job of really educating your people about the threat, what it is and what it isn't. I think it's also very important, Fred, to understand and to stress that while cyber is one of the tools that is frequently used in cyber espionage, it's not all of cyber espionage. We really need these educational programs to focus on really the human threat, the human intelligence threat, and how these corporate spies will also use that.
Let's talk a little bit about that. When you say the human aspect of that, what do you really mean?
Well, what I mean is that the fact that we've had a number of cases, and there have been different types of human agents. I mean, we have, in essence, in some cases, what we in the old days we would call a walk-in, where you've basically had employees of American or Western companies who have access to sensitive information, grab this information, and then use it to approach competitors saying, hey, I've got 500 gigabytes of data from this sensitive program. What will you pay me for it? Or what kind of job will you offer me in China if I come to work for you with this information? At the other end of the spectrum, there are kind of moles that are sent in specifically to take jobs in these companies to gain access to the desired information. And then there's kind of in the middle, you have agents who are recruited and who have access to the information that's desired. I also think it's important, especially with the Chinese threat. Traditionally, there was this thought that the Chinese only recruit ethnic Chinese. That is clearly not true. What we're seeing is they will recruit anyone who has access to the information that's required. And so we see them, there was a AMSC case, a semiconductor case, where they actually recruited a Serbian engineer working for the Austrian subsidiary of an American company. We've seen them go after engineers in places like Cincinnati. It doesn't just have to be ethnic Chinese that they're going to target.
And also the unique jobs that certain individuals may fill. I mean, if you hearken back to the days when we were looking at these kinds of threats in the government, the old guidance that let's try to recruit the ambassador secretary because they have access to schedules and all the inbox and meetings and so forth. Would you say that there's specific jobs that are much more advantageous to that nation-state intelligence service for targeting?
We do seem to see them targeting a lot of engineers, that have access to kind of like the technical data that they're seeking. I think also another class that's important to keep an eye on are IT personnel, because in many cases they do have the keys to the kingdom, and they may not be the technical employees, but while perhaps an adversary can't get something through a hack, if they can recruit an IT guy on the inside, they can get what they want without having to necessarily physically hack into the company.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And when you look at the Internet of Things and how multinational corporations or pretty much any business does work today, who doesn't lean heavily upon that staff to help in all facets of whatever you might be doing?
Absolutely. And in many cases, as we've seen, think about even past kind of governmental cases, people like Snowden, who are contractors. Certainly within your own corporation, if you think about, some of the contract employees, and in many cases, the IT staff can be among some of the least, highly paid. So they are, the lowest paid employees in your company. So they're kind of vulnerable to an approach with a financial hook.
As you take away from your piece you wrote on this topic, any things that you wish you had said but didn't?
Certainly we can't overemphasize enough the threat that's out there and the fact that it really does need to be addressed globally. You just can't have a piecemeal approach that treats information at facilities in Europe or in the U.S. differently than it does, information in a place like China or Russia, because it's really all vulnerable to a number of approaches. And that's why it's just so important to really identify what's important, to really vet and limit the employees who are able to access that, and then to really just continue to keep a careful watch for tradecraft. And that's another thing I guess maybe it would have been good to expand on, the way that the tradecraft keeps evolving that we're seeing used in these cases. So it's really important for security personnel to watch those tradecraft changes and then to adjust their security procedures in response to try to stop those tactics being used against them.
Scott, I think we'll leave it there. For more information, or for those of you interested in Scott's piece, please visit www.stratfor.com.
If you're interested in learning how Stratfor can help you with analytic tools to visualize and anticipate those areas in the world where your interests and operations are at greatest risk, be sure to visit stratfor.com/enterprise. If you have a question about this podcast or even an idea for the next one, please email us at podcast@stratfor.com. And if you have a moment, we'd love it if you left a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. We really appreciate your feedback. And for more geopolitical intelligence, links, and fun facts about what goes into forecasting world events, be sure to follow us on Twitter @Stratfor. Thanks again for listening.